Welcome back to Little House on Laurel. With fall just around the corner, I'm ready to start baking with apples. Apples are going to be in season soon. So I came up with this recipe I want to share with you today. It combines my favorite, sourdough, with fresh, crispy apples. What I came up with is a delicious round of sourdough apple bread with diced apples, cinnamon, and brown sugar, and baked to perfection. It tastes like apple pie filling that's been baked into the bread. Summer may be my favorite season of the year when I'm in the middle of it because I love all the fresh berries and fruits and vegetables that we get from our garden and from our local farmers. The sunny days of blue skies are pretty great too. But when fall rolls around and we have crisp, juicy apples, pumpkin spiced everything, harvest festivals, and cooler weather, then fall becomes my new favorite. There is so much to enjoy about every season. This crusty loaf of sourdough apple bread is fantastic for starting your fall season off right. You can buy a box of apples from your local farmer or even go apple picking yourself. Using produce that was grown in your area and harvested recently will give you the best flavor and the highest amount of nutrients. So as you can tell, I'm a big fan of cooking with the seasons, and you should check out my other video where I chat about why I love to cook with the seasons, as well as giving you my recipe for sourdough blueberry lemon scones. You can see that up above. But combining fresh produce with sourdough gives you even more benefits. Something that I truly love about baking with sourdough is that I'm bringing back to my kitchen a simple health practice that has been around for thousands of years. The method of sourdough baking was lost just a few generations ago. So I'm just trying to do my part to bring this health practice back into my kitchen and hopefully into yours as well. I know I will never go back to yeast bread again. So I'm going to give you a rundown on the ingredients and the tools that you may need for this recipe, as well as tips. Then I'm going to be taking video as I do each step, which is going to start this evening, and then it will sit out and ferment overnight at room temperature. I'll take you along on that journey, and you can watch me as I make the sourdough apple bread. So as far as ingredients, you will need half a cup of active sourdough starter, 1 1/4 cups of warm water, 2 1/2 cups of unbleached all-purpose flour, 1 teaspoon of sea salt, 2 Granny Smith apples, which will be about 2 cups or so once they're peeled and diced, 2 tablespoons of butter, 3 tablespoons of brown sugar, and 1 1/2 teaspoons of cinnamon. Tools you may need for this recipe are an enamel Dutch oven for baking. You can use a banneton basket that's been lined with a liner or a tea towel, or you can use a bowl that has been lined with a tea towel. You'll need a bread lame for scoring the top of your bread, and a serrated bread knife for slicing once it's baked, a bowl scraper, and parchment paper. My quick tips for you for making the sourdough apple bread are that when you're doing your stretch and folds, you can lightly dip your fingertips into a bowl of water, and this will help prevent sticking. You just don't want to do this too much because then you'll be adding a lot of water to your dough, which can make it even stickier. You also don't want to add any extra flour to your dough. And my other tip is that the apple in the dough will make the dough a little bit stickier than normal. So whether you're using a banneton basket or a bowl, you want to make sure you have that tea towel or liner and that you flour it generously. This will prevent the dough from sticking. If you're wondering why I use stretch and folds in this recipe instead of using a mixer with a dough hook, stretch and folds are used usually when you have a dough that's a little bit stickier and harder to handle. They help to build up the gluten structure of the dough, which you would do if you were kneading it with a dough hook. And this helps to make the dough more workable and easier to shape for baking. Stretch and folds are more gentle than kneading, and it requires less hands-on time touching the dough, which can actually make for a better result in your bread. Stretch and folds also produce bubbles in your bread, which is a feature that people really enjoy in their artisan sourdough bread. So this bread will last 5 to 6 days before it begins to mold. However, because of the apples, you can only leave it out at room temperature for about 2 days, and then you'll need to either refrigerate it or put it in the freezer. But honestly, our bread doesn't last even a day, so you probably won't have a problem with that. So I'm starting by pouring the active sourdough starter into the bowl. That's half a cup. And then I'm pouring 1 1/4 cups of water. Two and a half cups of unbleached all-purpose flour. A teaspoon of sea salt, and then I am mixing this up with my hands. It gets really, really sticky, so if you have a dough whisk, I would go ahead and use that. Otherwise, you're just gonna have to work the dough and then scrape it off of your fingers when you're done, which is what I ended up doing. And this is just to mix everything until it's incorporated, because then we're going to let it autolyze, which is letting it rest so that it soaks up the liquid into the flour. All right, so now I'm going to cover it for 30 minutes. And meanwhile, we're going to get our apple mixture ready. So you're going to start by peeling your apples. And I did want to mention, I have in the recipe to use Granny Smith apples because those hold up pretty well during baking. They don't turn really mushy, and they have a little bit more of a tangy flavor, which goes well with things that you're adding sugar to, like baked goods. But you can use any kind of apple you want. This is your sourdough creation, so feel free to use what you already have on hand or what you have growing or what you can get a good deal on. So then I'm gonna cut these into about 1/2 inch cubes. You just want them to be bite-sized pieces. Maybe you can tell I'm having a conversation with my daughter. I have her home from college right now, and so it's fun to talk to her while I'm preparing dishes. So I'm turning this to medium, and I added 2 tablespoons of butter and let that melt. So now I'm adding in the diced apples, and I'm going to also add 3 tablespoons of brown sugar, and then 1 1/2 teaspoons of cinnamon. And then I'm going to let that simmer over medium heat for about 5 to 6 minutes. You want the apples to be starting to soften. So when you pierce the apples with the fork, it'll feel a little bit soft, but not mush. This is going to smell almost like apple pie filling. It smells so good. You'll just stir it now and then while it's simmering so it can cook evenly. Now the dough's been autolyzing for 30 minutes, so it's ready for our first set of stretch and folds. And so you saw that I just dipped my fingers in the water. This will just help it to not stick to my fingers as much. As you can see, you take the top of the dough, one side of the dough, and pull it up to stretch it, and then fold it over to the middle. And you're going to turn it 90 degrees and do that again, and you'll turn it 4 times. You'll do 4 sides of stretch and folds, and that will make 1 set of stretch and folds. Okay, so now it's rested for 30 minutes and I am flattening it out so I can put half of the apple mixture on top before we do the stretch and folds. I used a slotted spoon so that I could drain any extra juice, so you don't want it to get too wet in there in the dough. And now I'm just going to do my stretch and folds pretty much how I normally do. I'm trying to keep the apple mixture from spilling out of the dough. It is inevitable that some of it is going to come out, and that's okay. It doesn't have to all be inside the loaf in the center. It's actually nice to have it spread out a little bit, but it makes it less messy if you can try to keep most of it inside. All right, resting again for 30 minutes, and now we're doing the third stretch and fold. I'm flattening it again so I can put the rest of the apple mixture on top. Now I'm going to stretch and fold 4 more times. And as you can see, it ripped right there. I think I added just a little bit too much water when I was dipping my fingers to make it less sticky. It's okay if it rips like that. You can just patch it up as you go. It will be okay. There's not a lot you can do at this point that's going to completely mess up your dough so that it's not edible. Just keep going and doing the stretch and folds, and try to keep the apples on the inside as much as possible. If there's a hole, just kind of patch it up. Stretch where there's a thicker wall of dough and try to stretch some of that to where it's thinned out too much. All right, I'm going to cover it now. I did a bulk ferment overnight, so that's about 8 to 12 hours. As you can see, it's definitely risen. So now I'm going to flour the counter, and scrape the dough out onto the floured counter. Now, I put a little bit of flour on my hands because it's pretty sticky, and I'm going to fold the dough over a couple of times to form it into a ball, and then I'm going to let it sit for about 20 minutes on the counter before I put it into the banneton basket. And remember, you can use a banneton basket or any bowl. Either way, you want to line it with a tea towel that's been floured generously so that this dough, which is a stickier dough, won't stick. So it's rested for 20 minutes on the counter. I just floured the banneton liner, and I'm gonna move it over. Now I'm going to cover it and let the dough rise one more time for 2 to 4 hours until it's doubled in size again. That's beautiful. So I've got a sheet of parchment paper and I just emptied it onto, and I'm scoring the top. Sometimes it helps if you flour it before you score it. Now I'm putting it into my preheated Dutch oven. I add the lid for the first 20 minutes. And it goes in the oven. And then after 20 minutes, you take the lid off and you bake it for another 10 to 15 until it's golden brown on top. And then take it out and it goes on a baker's rack. Okay, so our sourdough apple bread is all done baking and cooling. So I'm gonna go ahead and slice it. While I'm doing that, I wanted to give you a sample baking schedule. So you wanna feed your sourdough starter about 6 to 10 hours before you're going to start making this recipe. So I fed mine around noon. And then at 6:30 is when I started making the dough. And then I let it rest for 30 minutes. And while it was resting, I made the apple mixture. And then from 7 to 8:30, I did the 3 sets of stretch and folds. And then at 8:30, it was ready to cover and let it bulk ferment overnight. In the morning around 6:30, then I scraped the dough out onto a floured surface, formed it into a ball and let it rest for about 20 minutes. And then I put it into the banneton basket and let it rise for about 4 hours. And then it was ready to bake around 10 o'clock. I do have a serving suggestion for you as well. When we were growing up as kids, then our schools would sometimes serve chili and cinnamon rolls together, which sounds a little weird, but was really delicious, and we loved having that in the fall time. So this is a similar thing where this sourdough apple bread actually goes really well with chili because it has like the cinnamon and the sweetness. And then as well as in the Northeast, and of course anywhere else in the United States where you've tried this, people like apples and cheddar. Like they'll bake apple pie and have cheddar melted on top. So I had a slice of this with a slice of cheddar cheese on it just as a snack, and that was really good too. So that's something fun you can try. Well, I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope you were able to learn about how to make this sourdough apple bread. And if you have any questions or comments for me, please leave a comment down below and I will try to get back to you quickly. If you enjoy my videos, please give it a like and please subscribe to my channel. I have new content every week with farm fresh recipes and simple living ideas to help you on your journey to a healthy and happy home. Oh, and if you're looking for the printable recipe, I'll leave a link to that in the description box as well. I hope you have a great day. See you soon.